ever wondered how the monster world was created, we're going to look at the origins of the monster world today. But that's not all, we're going to take a look at the colossal spirits and how they assisted in its creation with the great song. Before we adventure into our first entry though, please do make sure to subscribe and hit the like button too, guys. The time before the creation of the monster world is known as the Primordial cosmic hush. This period was filled with absolute nothingness. That is until the Big Bang came along that created the monster world and brought about the Primordial cosmic hush's conclusion. Now the hush is an absolutely bare bones event inside of the monster world. Absolutely nothing happens inside of it. However, it's particularly of note, Plixie, the celestial of plasma, in fact was brought about and born from this event somehow. We don't know what exactly was involved in this process, however that is something really important to note. Other than this bare bones event then, how did the Big Bang come about? We don't know that unfortunately, but it seems to be very much linked towards how the Big Bang was brought about in our world. So going off of that fact, we can assume that it's based around a similar kind of thing. Going from that, let's go into the Big Bang. Following the Big Bang, the Celestials came into existence. Most of the major landmarks throughout the monster world, such as the living core and the living ocean, two of the biggest landmarks inside of the monster world, even to the present day, were brought about during this time when the Celestials came into existence. This Big Bang signified the beginning of the monster world and is the very event that caused the monster world to exist in the first place. It isn't the biggest thing to come into the creation of the monster world itself. I'm looking at you, Colossals, but it is indeed an important event nevertheless. Now, sometime after the birth of the Celestials, the Colossals came into existence. Some of you may already know, but the Colossals are huge disembodied spirits that exist throughout the monster world. They exist across many islands shown on screen, and they are music intertwined beings with divine powers. They can sing, and each Colossal is currently nameless. I do want to pay its particular attention, as I know this is something that people often get confused with. Colossals are spirits. They are not the huge masses of land that you see in-game. Those are in fact the islands. If we're talking about Colossals, try and imagine Colossals as being spirits that have been placed into these islands. As of right now, when they were created, they are still those disembodied spirits. So they aren't in any kind of land. They are rather just ghosts floating around the Dawn of Fire period, which is a really weird thing to imagine. Each Colossal, or rather ghost if we're going from that, possessed a unique deep voice and had abilities since sprouting from existence. They were the first entities to be able to sing inside of the monster world. However, that is not to mistake them as being a singing monster, as I do indeed think there is a huge distinction between the two. The Colossals possess creative powers that outreach any known entity inside of the monster world. That even goes for you, Celestials. They play the largest role in all known changes between periods and are immensely important to the lore. While they did not to bring about the Big Bang or the Primordial cosmic hush's end, they do indeed bring about every other timeline conclusion in the game, so they are very important beings inside of the monster world. The Colossals use their powers that they possess to be able to shape the monster world into what it was known as during the time of Dawn of Fire. Now, for the abilities that the Colossals do possess, they are very much nature intertwined. If you're talking about the Colossals' abilities, I think it's best to consider them as being able to mold the earth itself and the world that's surrounding them. They aren't necessarily able to do much beyond that, however. That power is laid out for the Celestials. After being created, the Colossals, however, were inspired by the elemental connections that the already created Celestials shared with their linked elements. Now, I am going on about the Celestial elemental configurations. For all of you who don't know, the Celestials are linked towards individual elements. So we have Galvana with the element of supernatural, for instance. We've been over how the Celestials were born before the Colossals. Yes, you heard that right. It's a weird doing, I know, as the Colossals are responsible behind everything. From being inspired by the Celestials, they taught the Celestials how to sing, each in a unique style, making the Celestials the first singing monsters to exist. The Celestials were taught by the Colossals how to sing, which is a really weird occurrence, especially when you consider they can't even sing now, which is a very weird thing indeed. But the Celestials are indeed the first monsters to be sprouted from existence, and they were from the Colossals, so in turn that does make the Colossals responsible for the entire multiverse of my singing monsters, which is a real mindful. And the Celestials and Colossals certainly do share a really interesting relationship when you consider consider how much the Celestials have been inspired by the Colossals themselves and how the Colossals were inspired by the Celestials, it makes up to be a really interesting lore point. Specifically, this relationship, I think, is of utmost importance when you're considering the knowledge that each species possesses, as that does mean that the Celestials likely do know a lot about the Colossals, and I would certainly keep that in mind, as that relationship, I do believe, is a very important lore point. After teaching the Celestials, the Colossals created Starhenge for the Celestials to be able to sing on, and this laid down the foundation for future islands that spruced up inside of the monster world. However, you've got to note that Starhenge was created by the Colossals very uniquely at a position so it was exactly halfway between the monster world down below and the stars up above. This is because of how Celestials harness their powers and how much the Celestials are linked to both the stars above and their constellations, and also the elements of the monsters and so forth that you would encounter down below. This was perfect for the Celestials, really, in being able to harness their full capabilities, and I in fact do think this highlights just how much of a good relationship that the Colossals and Celestials shared and how much they bonded with one another at this time. From their success with the Celestials, though, the Colossals began to experiment with how they could make the monster world an even better place, and coming forward from this, the monster world began sprouting into existence. Following on from what the Colossals learned from the Celestials, the Colossals decided to take their enjoyment in molding together musical harmony elsewhere, and every Colossal decided to begin taking part in a song known as the Great Song, the most important song to ever be sung in the lore. Each Colossal decided upon this as they thought it would be a good idea in being able to mold the world around them, and all of their abilities combined actually led them to being able to do a lot in terms of molding the monster world. This highlights the powers that the Colossals possess when they're able to sing. The Great Song is the only known occurrence of Colossals ever singing as of right now, and with this, it makes it a very monumental event to ever happen in the monster world, with their singing abilities unfortunately later being taken away from them. Poor Colossals, we feel for you guys. The divine powers of the Colossal spirits and the music of the Colossals coupled together made out a force to be reckoned with, and the Great Song allowed the Colossals to mold the monster world itself, which just really represents the immense amount of power that the Colossals possessed when singing together, and this is just by them singing. When we are put into perspective the difference between the Celestials' power and the Colossals, I think the best distinction to make between them is that the Colossals are able to make way in the world, but they can't shape it like what the Celestials can. I think that's the most important distinction to make between those two power thresholds there. By singing the Great Song from the Living Cord, the Colossals were able to draw up energy from the World Tree, a major landmark inside of the monster world. With this energy, the Colossals placed Amber, a musical potential, into the core of the monster world. This laid out the framework for the monster world literally up until this point, and allowed for islands to come forward in the future. I would pay particular attention, however, towards how they placed Amber in the very center, or rather core, of the monster world. A very interesting lore point indeed, and in fact I do think we need to look at Kana for this one. That's right, Kana. And from harnessing the power of the World Tree through the Great Song, the Colossals established what would become the continent. And with that, the birth of the monster world was fulfilled, yet we still have the Colossals to attend to for a little bit. In terms of size, Colossals are huge in size in the lore. In-game, it is just a miniaturized version that you see of the Colossals. In the lore, if we're lore speaking now, guys, they are a lot bigger than what we see in-game. That is for the exception of Starhenge. Starhenge is a lot smaller in size in comparison to the other islands in the lore. If we put that into perspective, that does mean that Celestial Island's Colossal must be smaller if we're going on that, but that's just a theory as of right now, but I think it would indeed make a lot of sense. The Colossals do possess other nature-based abilities, as they also possess the ability to make things bigger with biggification of monsters as we see on islands. And with that, we have gone over the complete origin story of the monster world. Well, the vast chunk of it. The rest of it we will be for sure to go over in future Lore Journals episodes. So with those monster mysteries, we end today's entry. Make sure to like and subscribe, fellow journalers, as if we have a look in the journal here, the next entry is sure to be just as jam-packed.